Another risk, election risk. Huge, critical year for the world. How are we assessing the election risk? There is a risk the wrong leaders will get elected.
Yes, elites are having sleepless night about Trump returning to the White House. I have a video I'm going to play. When I take a look at this article recently published by The Guardian, Boris Johnson has backed Donald Trump ahead of November US presidential election, saying his return to the White House could be just what the war needs. In his weekly dailymail.com, the former prime minister argued that if Trump backed Ukraine in its war against Russia, his reward leadership can be a big win for the war. He trashed the World Economic Forum about this issue. Why are they so worried about Trump returning to the White House?
Another risk, election risk. Huge, critical year for the world. How are we assessing the election risk? There is a risk the wrong leaders will get elected. There is a risk that the world will get even more fragmented. How are you looking at it at S&P?
It's one of the most important aspects of what we look at when we look at credit risk, we look at country risk and our research and analytics. It's one of the top risks for this year. We're discussing what could be some of the implications of the different elections, but it's also in light of the environment we're in. If we had some of the election outcomes and it was a benign macroeconomic and geopolitical environment, we might not worry about it, but we have wars, we have dislocation, we have fragmentation. We have to see what the outcomes are in the elections, but we could end up with more fragmentation. The direction could be more pulling apart. Fortunately, the United States has very strong institutions, the Congress and the courts. We're going to have to rely on them depending on what the outcome of the election is. And we also need to make sure that we stay engaged through the global institutions like the United Nations, like NATO, other organizations around the world. And I add into that also trade pacts. So it's on our radar screen when we look at risk and we do projections. And so this is going to be a year we got to watch.
Where is the biggest election?
When you take a look at how things are happening, very concerning. Who can actually stop the wars going on? The only persons I can assume is Trump at this time. Just within the space of 4 years, what we have seen, I'm even saying 4 years, 3 years, what we are witnessing, we never saw that when Trump was president. And the World Economic Forum is more concerned about him returning to the White House. Then I begin to ask myself, so these people actually love what is happening? Or why are they so afraid? That is a question that passes through my mind every single day. There is another clip.
It's been well written about. He had over 30,000 false or misleading claims in his 4 years as a president. If that comes from the top, is that part of the issue and the problem as well, Naomi?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's one of the reasons this issue has become so vexed in the United States, because now ordinary people are getting a lot of disinformation in social media, much of which is coming from private sector interests, but then it gets amplified when it gets reposted and resent by ordinary people who think, oh, this is interesting, I'll pass this on. But then it's also being amplified at the top. And this is one reason why I'm glad we're here talking about this at the World Economic Forum, because I think the business community has a big role to play in challenging this. Because one of the things we've seen in the United States is we have a small sector of what I'll call bad actor private sector agents, and we know who they are, who are responsible for the vast majority of disinformation. And the rest of the private sector is just sitting on the sidelines. And they're just not saying anything, and they're biting their tongue because, well, maybe they liked President Trump for other reasons because he cut corporate taxes. And so I think the private sector has largely stood by and allowed a lot of really damaging things to happen, things that in the long run will not be good for, liberal democratic capitalism. And so I really hope that the World Economic Forum will take this issue on board and think harder about the role that the private sector can play in standing up against disinformation, even if they might like the fact.
The problem is not just to say you.
Here you can see how the accounting from misinformations when he was president. They had a record of it. That is maybe one of the reasons they are scared of Trump returning. When I take a look at what is happening now with the World Economic Forum this year, they are all focused on misinformation. It bothers me a lot to see how a lot of these legacy media make mistakes, publish some really false information. They don't consider that misinformation. When somebody does that, the way they portray it, it sounds too loud.
If you go back really not that long ago, as I say, we owned the news. We were the gatekeepers, and we very much owned the facts as well. If it said it in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, then that was a fact. Nowadays, people can go to all sorts of different sources for the news, and they're much more questioning about what we're saying. So it's no longer good enough for us just to say, this is what happened, or this is the news. We have to explain our working. So readers expect to understand how we source stories. They want to know how we go about getting stories. We have to sort of lift the bonnet, as it were, and in a way that newspapers aren't used to doing, and explain to people what we're doing. We need to be...
Yes, looking through this article, in the cocktail parties of Davos, I am told the global workerati have been trembling so violently that you could hear the eyes twinkling in their negrons, he wrote. Elsewhere in his column, Johnson considered that the former Republican president, who is facing 91 felony charges across former criminal cases, has been caught saying a few unguided things. Johnson claimed that what the world needs now is a U.S. leader whose willingness is to use force and share unpredictability is a major deterrent to the enemies of the West. He also said that Trump is interested in a proper free trade deal with Britain after hopes of a full-blown trade deal were abandoned last year. He is more concerned what happened at the World Economic Forum, that he has got information that they are trembling Trump returning to the White House, though he said some things in the past that were not right, but he sees that is the right person that can stop all the nonsense happening in the world.
It's an invite-only event. So you have to be somebody just to get through the door. And if you're in, guests are slapped with wristbands and divided by class.
My spirit name is Ozawa Makwa, which means brown bear in Ojibwe. My father is Algonquin Métis and Irish. My mother is African Jamaican and Indigenous Jamaican. So I get to bring these intersections and these lenses to my work.
And coming as a white man of advanced age from a continental European background.
Inclusion is about see me and hear me and make space for me.
And so we should all be doing this because you can make a profit. Inclusion is profitable.
It's laughable that you would, or anyone would describe Davos as protecting liberal democracy.
You had the World Economic Forum in Davos just playing out in the last week or so, right? Yeah. That old world vision is rearing its head again that says the people cannot be trusted to self-govern. They'll ruin themselves, right?